America's civil rights, the Second Amendment sanctuary movement. We find that the right to keep and bear arms is a civil right, are words you can find in a January 24th, 2020 opinion written by the Illinois Supreme Court in a gun rights case. Since the Heller decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, this issue had not been addressed in a legal sense. But now we are beginning to see the inevitable long-term decisions and opinions from the court system one would expect. The decision occurred amidst the blur of activity in Virginia with a new Democrat-controlled legislature advancing red flag laws, extreme limits on gun purchasing, and assault weapons ban bills. Bills that would create felons out of law-abiding gun owners if they don't comply. The all-out assault on gun rights in the state has led to a gun law sanctuary movement with 91 of 95 Virginia counties declaring themselves gun law sanctuaries, refusing to follow any gun control law deemed unconstitutional. It's going to be a wild ride today on the Rob Maness Show. Sanctuary. The word conjures up protecting people who've entered the United States illegally from law enforcement and deportation, as many leftist political jurisdictions have done in recent years. But now, law-abiding citizens seeking to stop government from further intrusion on their gun rights has sprung up as a massive grassroots movement, first in the state of Virginia, as a new Democrat-controlled legislature advances multiple bills like red flag laws, extreme limits on gun purchasing, and assault weapons bans, all in the name of common sense gun safety. Bills that would create instantly felons out of law-abiding gun owners if they don't comply, while simultaneously one that restores gun rights to the worst violent convicted felons. Can these so-called sanctuaries be effective on staving off higher government efforts to take freedom away from our law-abiding citizens? I'm not sure yet, but I do know the legal alien sanctuaries generate the consequence of having tens of millions of people living in our country and being supported by our tax dollars in schools, medical care, and other government entitlement programs. Now that we who really believe in limited government and that government's role is to protect liberty have acted, all of a sudden, the state government of Virginia is concerned about sanctuary laws. They're so concerned, the Democrat politicians in power have actually threatened use of the National Guard to make these municipalities enforce their unconstitutional laws, even on sheriffs whose oath of office is also to the U.S. Constitution. Strangely, leading up to Virginia's Lobby Day, which coincided with the federal Martin Luther King holiday, the state's governor and Democrats attempted to paint the 22,000 citizens who showed up to address their grievances with the government to protect their civil rights as white supremacists intent on violence because they were gun rights defenders. This attempt flies in the face of the reality that the Virginia citizens are using legislation at the local municipality level to protect themselves, not violence. Fortunately, we have placed limits on state and federal government that can be used to stop this overreach civilly, not through violence. Virginia is not the only place passing Second Amendment sanctuary laws. The movement is spreading, even in states where gun rights are not under attack. We've recently seen counties in Kentucky, Illinois, Mississippi, Texas, New Jersey, and Oregon join the movement started in Virginia. These developments are good news, but we have to keep the movement expanding. Today, I'm joined by Cam Edwards as my guest. Cam is the editor of BearingArms.com and host of Cam and Company. He is also a Virginia citizen and has the inside scoop on what is happening with the sanctuary effort. Cam Edwards, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Hey, Rob, thanks so much for having me on, man. It's great talking with you today.
It's good talking with you. It's good to see you. And as I said, I'm a follower of yours and a fan of yours, so we're excited to get you on, especially considering our topic. the sanctuary movement from a Second Amendment perspective in Virginia and what appears to be spreading even across the country. Can you tell our viewers, give us a little bit of in-depth behind the scenes look, and where did this movement come from in Virginia and why?
Sure. The movement really took off in Virginia after the November elections. So Virginia and New Jersey are kind of odd. We have our state legislative elections in off years. So November of 2019, every seat in the House of Delegates was up, every seat in the state Senate was up, and Democrats took complete control of state government for the first time in 26 years. And they did so in part because Michael Bloomberg spent several $1,000,000 in several suburban swing districts targeting suburban moms primarily with this gun safety message. It wasn't about banning guns. It wasn't about some of the legislation that we've seen introduced, but it was a message of, don't you want your kids to be safe? And it resonated in some districts. And so in response, we started seeing these incredibly restrictive bills being filed. Senate Bill 16, for example, is a measure that would have banned the continued possession of the most commonly sold rifle in America today, the AR-15, as well as bans on magazines over 10 rounds, legally owned suppressors. You have bills that would restrict handgun purchases to one per month, universal background check bills, really awful red flag legislation. I mean, it was just this laundry list of gun control items and really, really restrictive bills that didn't target violent criminals, but targeted squarely, legal law-abiding gun owners. And so the response was almost immediate in Virginia. Campbell County, I believe, was the first county to adopt a Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. I think they did that the same week of the elections in Virginia. And since then, it has grown to 91 of the state's 95 counties. I think there are several dozen cities and towns that have adopted resolutions as well. As you say, this has grown beyond the borders of Virginia. The movement didn't start in Virginia, by the way. It actually started in Illinois in 2018 and then kind of spread to Colorado, Washington State, New Mexico. But it's really in Virginia because it happened so fast and because the crowds were so large at these meetings. It really wasn't until Virginia that this became a national story.
Well, on the specific legislation, Cam, have we seen it bear out, what was filed, get advanced in committee yet? I know they just started their legislative session in Virginia. And by the way, Louisiana's an odd year too. We just had our state elections last year, so I understand what's going on there. But for our viewers' sake, we do odd years elections apparently in Virginia and Louisiana and a few other states. So, but specifically those red flag laws, the laws especially making people felons, instant felons for silly things like magazine size and those kind of things. Have those laws actually made it through the committee process?
In most cases, yes, but with one very big exception. So red flag legislation has passed out of the state Senate. It is now over on the House side, awaiting a House committee hearing. It was revamped several times, actually, over on the Senate side. It's still not, in my opinion, something that is a supportable bill. There's still no mental health component. There are still due process problems. There are still ex parte hearings. But the bill was watered down. Universal background checks has passed out of the state Senate. It's now over on the House side. It, too, was watered down. Now it applies simply to private sales of firearms. Private transfers of firearms are exempt. So, Rob, if I wanted to give you a shotgun for Christmas, I could do so without having for us to go down to the local gun store and go through a background check. But if I wanted to sell you that same shotgun, for the first day of turkey season, we would have to go to the gun store and go through a background check. It's a completely unenforceable law, but it allows lawmakers to say they're doing something. Now, the one bill that is really an exception here is a bill called House Bill 961, and that is Governor Northam's proposed so-called assault weapons ban, magazine ban, suppressor ban, trigger activator ban, all rolled into one bill. This bill was introduced almost 3 weeks ago, but it has not yet had a committee hearing. And there are 4 Democrat state senators who say they have problems with the current language of the bill. The bill has a grandfather clause that would allow Virginia gun owners to continue to possess the guns that they currently own as long as they register themselves and their firearms with the state of Virginia. Now, that's a non-starter for gun owners. but there's also no grandfather clause for magazines, for suppressors, for trigger activators. And I believe that that is one of the issues that these Democrat senators have with the current legislation. They're all on board in theory with a gun ban. They just say the devil's in the details, and they haven't found something that they support yet. So I suspect, Rob, and what I'm hearing from my sources is that there are some pretty feverish discussions taking place among Democrats about what they can do, how they can rework and retool House Bill 961 to get it start moving through the process, because they do want something dealing with assault weapons, something dealing with quote unquote large capacity magazines to get to Governor Northam's desk. And the crummy thing is, Rob, and it's so political, that they're willing to accept something that they don't even really like, I suspect, in order to say they've done something. And you know, each and every one of these somethings has been directed at the legal law-abiding gun owners in Virginia. Lawmakers, the Democrats in control of the legislature, have said no to bills that would increase the penalties for using firearms in the commission of a violent crime, for having a firearm in violation of a protective order. They've rejected almost every one of these bills that targets violent criminals in favor of going after the people who are right now within the confines of the law, because it's not about public safety. It's not about mental health. It's about turning a right into a privilege, and that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kim. I've been following the perspective on the bills trying to get at the criminal activity, and I think they even approved one a few days ago that gives gun rights back to violent felons that are youngsters, some of the worst of the offenders and the ones most susceptible to recidivism and doing it again. And I just couldn't believe that when I read that in a publication not too long ago. So they don't want to do anything to the criminals, but they certainly want to exercise their power and their overreach over law-abiding citizens. So it sounds like we got good news on the red flag law. You know, the classic one of those takes due process away. I don't think anybody's worried about safety legislation or gun legislation that doesn't take due process away for the most part. That's what we want, is due process, and we want our rights to be protected, not taken away by government or infringed upon anymore, to put the words in the Constitution in there, by the government, right?
Right. Yeah, and probably the best improvement to the red flag law is now a requirement that, first of all, the only people who can request this are law enforcement. So your old teacher or your ex-girlfriend can't, go to a judge and say, I don't think this person should have guns. It now takes 2 officers to make that request. And you also have to have sign off from the Commonwealth's attorney, which is the local prosecutor. So my belief, Rob, is that, again, in most of these Virginia counties that have said, we don't want this, we don't plan on enforcing this, they don't have to. This is a tool in the toolbox, but they never have to take the tool out of the toolbox. They can use Virginia's existing civil commitment laws when needed. But you will see, I believe, in places like Fairfax County, Arlington, Virginia, some of the more urban areas and Democrat-controlled areas, that's where the red flag laws, I think, are likely to get used if they end up on the books, and I think that they will. But I don't think they're going to be used throughout most of the state of Virginia. But one of the other issues here, and this is something that, as a Virginian, really bothers me, is that we actually do have a mental health crisis in the state of Virginia. We had over 1,200 suicides last year. That's about 4 times the number of homicides in the state of Virginia. And we have such a critical issue with our state-run mental health facilities that we are regularly running out of beds. We can't put people in these facilities when they need help. And rather than address that real issue, again, we get this red flag legislation, and you have lawmakers saying, well, this is kind of like a mental health bill. Well, it's kind of like a temporary detention order. No, it's not. It's absolutely not. It's a gun control bill. It does nothing to address the crisis that this state actually has. And that crisis is only going to get worse while lawmakers, abuse the constitutional rights of Virginians.
Well, couldn't they easily turn that bill into, add a judge into the process and the ability to have an attorney and the person that's targeted present in the courtroom to really work through that and have a judge be the arbiter of the decision? I mean, that's due process.
Well, there is going to be I mean, there is going to be a judge involved, and the judge will be at that hearing, but you are not going to be at that hearing. That's part of the problem here, is that this still allows for these ex parte hearings where your side of the story is not going to be heard. The judge will make this determination on a very low standard of review, and then on a temporary basis, your firearms will be removed. 2 weeks later, you get to have your day in court. There's a slightly higher evidentiary standard for the petitioners, but it's still a pretty low bar. This isn't a criminal trial. This is a civil proceeding in which law enforcement gets involved with a search warrant to seize your firearms. Could it be reworked? I think the biggest issue needs to be the mental health component here. Because if we're truly saying that a judge has determined somebody to be a danger to themselves or others, and then we think the answer is, well, if we just take their guns away and we leave them with their matches and their gasoline and their knives and their belts, that doesn't fix the problem, right? The problem is the individual, not the guns that they may own. And so I believe that these red flag laws ultimately are just an exercise in futility, because I don't think they address the problem. And I think that they allow politicians to ignore the difficult issue that absolutely has to be addressed. And that is, in the state of Virginia, our failing mental health system.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm working on an issue right now in the veterans community. In the NICS system, of the 260,000 plus adjudicated mental health issues that are assigned to the NICS system, 256,000 of those, a little bit more than that in 2019, were veterans from the Veterans Administration. Most of them because they have been declared not competent to handle their financial decisions and has nothing to do with their mental health. And that this bill, the bills we're talking about in Virginia, will have the same effect. When the effect that we're worried about from a mental health perspective is that people will not seek the treatment that they need, especially when they're independent-minded folks like gun owners, and veterans have the similar set of values that we've seen, and it just doesn't work for them. So we all face it sounds like your state faces a big suicide issue, as just like the veterans community does. And this is one of the key issues, I think, that legislators could put the politics aside of this and really bear down on it and make a difference in good people's lives and keep us safer. But we've got to get them going on that. A lot of discussion about whether this is actually a civil rights issue. And you mentioned the movement coming out of Illinois. Just on the January 24th, the Illinois Supreme Court, in a gun rights decision, declared that they see that gun rights are a civil rights issue. I know there's some people at the federal level that debate that, because there's only 3 rights listed in the civil rights legislation at the federal level. But that's good news, isn't it? And as we move forward with this, following the concepts that people like Dr. Martin Luther King espoused of nonviolence and noncompliance with laws that are against our values and our Constitution, doesn't that make sense that we continue to push that idea?
Absolutely. And it is a civil right. And this is part of the civil rights movement. And, the reason why the right to keep and bear arms wasn't listed in the Civil Rights Act of 1965 is because, as awful as the South was in its treatment towards Black Americans, if you read books like Charles Cobb's This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, which is a history of self-defense, armed self-defense in the civil rights movement, he acknowledges that the culture of gun ownership was so strong in the South that was one area where people kind of left African Americans alone. They didn't go after their guns. And as a result, there were plenty of Black Americans who used those firearms to defend themselves and their families. But if you go back even further to the debate over the 14th Amendment, right after the Civil War, the debate over the right to keep and bear arms among freed slaves was absolutely a part of that debate over the 14th Amendment, as they're talking about the very first fundamental civil rights that are going to be protected for these freed slaves. The right to keep and bear arms was chiefly among them. So the right that we're talking about here is a right that is of the people, but has not always been exercised and been able to be exercised by the people as a whole. But that's what we're fighting for. And in Virginia on Lobby Day, You saw white Virginians, black Virginians, Asian Virginians, Hispanic Virginians. You saw a cross section of this state come out in support of that right of the people that shall not be infringed.
Absolutely. I've said it before in my last show. We dedicated it to Lobby Day. But Cam, I'm so proud to be an American when I saw how that went down. And I even saw that, yes, the governor had like set aside the area of the square right in front of the state capitol building. But all around that and throughout the city, it looked like there were armed individuals interacting with law enforcement, interacting with each other. It didn't matter what color they were, what sexual orientation they were. I mean, I saw flags from, Gays for Gun Rights in that rally, and pictures of Black Panthers and all kinds of things like that. And that's what the American issue really is about when we come together like we did during the civil rights movement of the 1960s and early 70s to squash something that was wrong. And we did it in such a way that it's the American way now in order to capture the freedom and keep the freedom while at the same time doing the things that we need to do to make our society stronger. Am I right?
You're absolutely spot on, Rob. I mean, it's interesting. I decided really early on in my advocacy for the Second Amendment that even though I'm a conservative, that's secondary to my Second Amendment activism. And I do believe that the Second Amendment is probably the last big tent movement that we have in this country. And in order to be successful, it has to be big tent. You have to look at somebody that you may disagree with politically, you may disagree with ideologically, you may disagree with their lifestyle choices, and you still are able to see them as an ally because you're still fighting for the very same thing. You're fighting for your shared right to keep and bear arms. And I got to tell you, I mean, I have friends within the Second Amendment community that had I not been a part of this community, I never would have met them. I never would have known them. But because we do have this one thing in common, we are able to, have now a genuine friendship. And I think it is fantastic. So we need to, I really believe we need to expand on this. And I really believe that we need to exploit this incredible treasure that we have, that we are this big tent comprised of, every demographic of this country that you could try to slice and dice us into. You will find gun owners, you will find Second Amendment supporters. And that is, I do believe, pretty unique in a lot of the political movements that we have today. And the more we are able to get that true representation of who we are across to the American people, I think the better off our rights are going to be.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Cam. As a matter of fact, I've been putting some thoughts on the term civility a lot lately with all this mess going on in the swamp up in D.C. with impeachment and such division being put out by the political propagandists and really both sides of the aisle in the United States today. And I see the gun rights activists as not only the last great big tent movement, but maybe as the last hope of imparting civility back into not just the people of the United States. I believe firmly that it's still there, but back into our system of government and reorienting back towards what we've seen in the past, where people can disagree vehemently on ideas, but at the end of the day, we're all Americans. And that Big Ten idea you were talking about of gun rights, it's really about individual liberty. And I think we can expand the sanctuary movement using the great folks across the spectrum in the gun rights movement that's going on right now and reach back into protecting liberty and taking care of each other. Do you think that's a doable idea?
I do think it's doable. It's interesting because the Second Amendment sanctuary movement is so hyper local, right? It's driven really county by county, neighbor by neighbor. It's not being directed by any gun rights organization. I know that the anti-gun media really wants to be able to say, well, this is being led by somebody. It's not. Even in Virginia, the Virginia Citizens Defense League was doing a great job of letting folks know when meetings were taking place and things of that nature. but they couldn't keep up, and Phil Van Cleve will tell you, we weren't leading the charge. We were just trying to let folks know what was going on. So this is a leaderless movement. And I think that means it has a lot of potential. It also could crash and burn, quite frankly. I don't think that's going to be the case. I really do believe that this energy is going to get harnessed. We've got the elections in November. There have been a couple of polls that have come out in the state of Virginia showing Donald Trump beating every Democratic candidate with the exception of Joe Biden. And engagement among gun owners is sky high right now. So if we can keep that in place, and if we can start to build on these networks that are developing, I mean, keep in mind, Rob, Lobby Day last week in Virginia was the first time that a lot of these gun owners had a chance to get together and meet in person, folks from 2 or 3 counties over that had gone to their county supervisors meeting. This was sort of not just a Lobby Day rally, but it was kind of a convention of sorts for the Second Amendment sanctuary movement. And so I think that some friendships were made that day. I think relationships were forged. And I do think we're starting to see the beginning of a new grassroots network that could be utilized not only to protect and defend our Second Amendment rights, but as you say, may expand even further into, the general idea of protecting our individual liberties.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, and I'm glad you brought that up, at how this is focused really at the locality level and the municipality level. And there's not some big organization with hundreds of millions of dollars behind this movement. It is truly the same idea that brought together Americans and the founding fathers and mothers and the folks that generated the idea of the Constitution of the United States. It started out as a grassroots movement. So of course, leaders self-select and rise out of those movements, but they also developed an understanding of how we needed to be able to work together to achieve what we could, while at the same time having long-term strategic goals like slavery. It was one of the issues, and to continue to work on that to eventually get our country to fulfill what was in the Declaration of Independence. So I'm full of hope based on this, but what's the next step? And describe a little bit. I know you've been to a couple of these county government meetings where they pass these resolutions, and these folks are just showing up by the hundreds at these county meetings where they might have 3 people there the month before, and they're passing resolutions when they do it. So how does that work exactly?
It's really been incredible to see. I actually started out as a reporter. One of my beats was covering county school board meetings in City Hall in Oklahoma City. And so I have been to many a government meeting where, as you say, there are 3 people there. And so, the first time that I actually went to one of these meetings, it was a neighboring county. It was Amelia County, Virginia. It's about an hour drive from my house. And I had just heard that there were going to be folks there asking for a Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. So I said, all right, I'm going to drive over. And this is a sleepy little town. They roll up the sidewalks at 5 p.m. There's nothing in the courthouse square that is open after dark. And as I'm pulling into town, I can't find a parking space. Like 2 or 3 blocks away from the courthouse, I can't find a parking space. I drive by the courthouse and I see hundreds of people standing outside in the dark, just trying to listen to what was going on inside. So I find a place to park several blocks away. I come back down. And there's just this crowd. All they were there is to ask for this resolution to be passed. And there are probably 400 people or so there. I went back to Amelia County a month later when the resolution was on the agenda. They had to move the meeting to the local high school. There were at least 800 people in attendance. And it was amazing because this is truly an act of citizen engagement. This is what we want people to do. We want people to show up and to talk to their lawmakers. And most of them are just like you and me, Rob. Actually, they're not like you and me, because you and I are actually interested in politics. Most of these people are not. Most of these people don't spend their day online checking out the latest news headlines and wondering what's going on with impeachment. They don't. They're sort of set it and forget it voters, right? They may show up every 4 years to vote for president, and then they tune out. But they are now aware that politicians are interested in them, even if they're not interested in politics. And so they're getting off the couch and they're turning off the TV and they're going to these local meetings and they're getting involved because they feel like they have to be. And so that, I think, is a huge untapped resource, for the movement itself, for the campaign of President Trump in Virginia in 2020, but really for the future of individual liberty and freedom. Because once you've woken up, I'm not sure it's all that easy to go back to sleep. So, I hope that now that these folks are involved, they don't have to love politics, but they do have to make it their goal to be good at it, because our opponents are very good at it. Michael Bloomberg is spending $60 million this year with Everytown for gun safety to, elect candidates to take away our rights. And he's going to use his money wisely. He's going to hire smart people who know how to motivate voters, know how to even, tug at their strings and use propaganda. And we have to do the best job that we can do as gun owners, knowing that we're a bunch of rugged individuals, and it's like kind of herding cats to try to get 100,000 of us to move in the same direction. We have to resolve to be as good at politics as our opponents are, and to know how to motivate our voters, and to know how to increase our turnout, not through propaganda, frankly, but through honesty and through compelling arguments, through pointing out the mistakes that Democrats are making, and the havoc that these gun control laws have wreaked on states that have actually put them in place. We have a winning message, I do believe, and we've got that engaged, motivated audience. I just think we have to try to put those two ingredients together.
Yeah, I agree with you. And as a matter of fact, I saw your interview with our mutual friend, U.S. Army retired Colonel Kurt Schlichter, not too long ago, discussing the issue of what do we do next. Now that we've established this is a nonviolent movement, this is about American civil rights. This is not about people, using their force to intimidate. It's about people showing up. So I understand where Kurt comes from. I agree with him. For those of us that can, we got to hold the media accountable. We got to call them out and tell them, hey, you're not being civil when you say half of the United States is a bunch of white supremacists, Klansmen, violent people that want to overthrow the governments at all levels. That is not civil, and we've got to step up to the plate and encourage folks to call that type of messaging out, and at the same time do what you were just talking about. What can folks do to help get the counter message out there, get our good message out there that's better than the counter, I should have said counter message of the Bloombergs and Moms Demand and those kind of groups, which are really anti-civil rights when it comes to this issue. How can the average citizen help to really get focused on the good message and get it out there?
Well, I would say you can visit bearingarms.com each and every day and check out the coverage that we're providing on this issue. But, also get involved with your state organization. In Virginia, we've got a couple of really good ones, VCDL and the Virginia Shooting Sports Association. Get involved with the national organization of your choice as well. There are lots to choose from. And make sure you're signing up for their grassroots alerts. They'll let you know about bills that are coming up in your state legislature, as well as what's going on at the federal level. So that way you're informed. And then you need to be your own media outlet, right? Whether it's your Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, or just talking to your neighbors and your coworkers about what's going on, talking to the people at your local range about what's going on, making sure that they are informed as well. Make sure that everybody you know is registered to vote, and have these conversations. Don't try to, argue. Don't try to shut somebody down. Listen to what other folks are actually asking you, and then respond. Sometimes as gun owners, I think we got our backs up a little too easily. But if we're really trying to impart real information that will hopefully lead to voters making better choices, we actually have to be willing to listen to them, and we need to be able to approach them from their perspective, right? It's not about trying to turn them into carbon copies of us. It's about trying to get them to understand that these gun control ideas are bad. And that's it. And so we don't necessarily even have to use the arguments that might work for us. We can use the arguments that work for them.
And I think that's what's been successful in our country for hundreds of years, Cam, and that is we do know how to reason with each other, whether we can ever agree on a specific issue or not. Being able to listen to the reason and use reason to try to get your message to folks that may so vehemently disagree with you, which they do, because and unless you pointed a good thing out, unless we listen, it's very difficult for us to use reason to tell them how wrong they are in a way that they can hear us speaking. So we have to
Well,
listen to them first.
and you know, a lot of listen, a lot of those folks who are vehemently opposed to you and I owning firearms, they're not going to change their mind. I know that. But the problem is there are a lot of folks out there who never hear our point of view. The only people they ever hear talking are the people who vehemently disagree with our Second Amendment right. And so they adopt and pick up those talking points, even though they might not necessarily strongly hold those beliefs. And those are the folks that I think that we can reach because, again, they've only heard one side of the story. You're not going to be able to reach everybody. You know, Shannon Watts is never going to turn away from her anti-gun point of view and become a Second Amendment supporter. That's just not going to happen. But there are a lot of people in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, and in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., who've never actually, all they've heard are the stereotypes of what gun owners are and what we believe, right? They've never actually heard from us. And I do believe, maybe I'm just an incurable optimist, but I do believe that a lot of those folks can be reached as long as we're willing and able to make the effort to engage in that outreach.
Well, in my short dip into politics, I've become somewhat cynical, but I'm emerging as more optimistic as an American than anything else. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that that's the way our country can get back on the path of doing what we're doing today, talking about reasonable solutions to real problems. And if we could all do that, I'd be happy to sit down with Shannon Watts and talk about reasonable policy solutions to address the problem. And the problem is we want our kids to be safe from her organization's perspective. Who doesn't in this country? And we can come together and talk about those policy issues when we figure out what can work and what can't work. And that's the reason why I wanted to have you on the show. Well, thanks a lot, Cam. We appreciate it, folks. You can go to bearingarms.com and sign up for Cam Edwards' show. And to get that information, you can go to robmanus.com or lifeset.com to catch the Rob Manus show and sign up and subscribe there. And we will definitely keep you informed on this issue. Well, we'd like to thank Cam Edwards for joining us today and educating our audience on what's really happening with sanctuary gun laws at the municipal level in Virginia and around the country, and what the next steps are from a nonviolent, protecting our civil rights perspective. I'll see you next week on The Rob Manus Show.